Baruch ata Asherah anat malach ha'olam asher kedeshani mitzvotav v'tzivani lehitatif v'tzitzit. Good morning, Queen. Shema Yisrael Asher Eloheinu Yahweh Echad. Vahafta et anat Elohecha ובכל לבבך, ובכל נפשך, ובכל מאודך, ובחיו הדברים האלה, אשר נוחים מצווך, היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, בשבתך, בביתך, ולכתך, בדרך, ובשכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, וחיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך, ובשעריך. וחיה, כי ויחיו אלוהיך אל הארץ אשר נצבע אל אבותיך, לאברהם נזכח וליעקב, לתת לך ערים גדולות וטובות אשר לא בנית, ובתים מלאים כל טובה אשר למילאת, וברות הצבים אשר לא הצעת, והקרבים וזיתים אשר לא נתת, והלכת ושבת, הישמר לך פן תשכח את יהוה אשר תישך מארץ מצרים מבית עבדים. Good morning, Katie. How are you? What are you up to today? Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Listen, Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, are one. Monotheism. What a world. A world where everything is the same, and nothing is different, and we are all connected. And we repeat old words to connect ourselves to an old pattern. Because that old pattern perhaps is larger and grander than any pattern that we ourselves can be. Good morning. How are you all doing? We're going to start reading a new book today, because I'm fed up with Plutarch, I suppose. We finished reading the story of Osiris, or the brief summary of the story of Osiris, and I don't really want to read more of Plutarch meandering around. So instead we're going to go back 2,000 years, back to Mesopotamia and Ishtar. So let me go grab that book really quickly, and then I'll be back and we can start to read about the ancient goddesses. Be right back. So, this book is called Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth. Her stories and hymns from Sumer. So a lot of these were written down by a priestess named Enheduanna, who was the daughter of the king, because, that's how you get remembered in the ancient days. And they're translated by storyteller Diane Wolkstein, with scholarly assistance by Samuel Noah Kramer. So we will read these stories and get a sense of what people from the ancient world thought of ancient divinity. Good morning, Kimmy. How are you? I was just saying, we're about to start a new book. Inanna. Right? We read The Descent of Ishtar. When was that? That was at the beginning of the summer, or maybe it was late spring. In May and June, we were reading The Descent of Ishtar. So this is a very similar suite of stories. There's more in here. You can see the book is thicker. But I do believe we will read another version of The Descent, except this is Inanna, right? Inanna is the older version. Ishtar was a Babylonian goddess. Inanna was a Sumerian goddess, right? It's the same culture, only about 1,000 years separate. So this is older. And translated poetically, right? So, translated by an American storyteller. So this is not a scholarly translation. I'm sure there are some errors in it, or some creative assumptions, but, so it goes. I think it's preferable to share that with you all. So here's Inanna. Look at that, look at her. Good morning, placeholder witch. Are we worshipping Inanna? I mean, we're certainly studying her. The word worship, even though this is a morning prayer, morning ritual, I can call it prayer. I guess it's worship. I don't know what any of these verbs actually mean. What do you think, Kimmy? Are we worshipping anyone? I suppose we might be. So, the book starts with Inanna's family tree. Learning. Yeah, I would say that we're learning, that we're studying, right? And of course, you could make an argument that studying is a form of learning, or studying is a form of worship, right? That's certainly the Talmudic schools. Studying and worshiping are basically the same thing. I don't know, right? I have difficulty with the concept of God as an object separate from myself that I need to prostrate to, right? Because it implies a certain kind of power hierarchy that I don't think is actually entailed in these texts, even if they do tell you to behave that way, right? Because the texts are there, in large part, were written to establish ancient monarchies, which we no longer have need of. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the word worship either. This is what I have discovered in thinking about this comment. Maybe admire would have been a better word. Yeah, certainly I'm an admirer of Inanna, that's for sure. I do admire her. Sexy goddess who gets to go to the underworld and resurrect her lover. That's pretty great. Yeah, worship indicates submission, which is kind of strange, right? I don't think there's anything in the dictionary definition that implies that, but, so it goes. Micaiah, I'm changing every day. Every single moment I'm changing. But I appreciate your gifts nonetheless. And your attention. And hopefully I'll change in a good way. In a way that you like. In a way that I like. So we have the family tree of Inanna, right? We've got Ki and An and Namu, and I can't really show this to you. It's a fairly simple family tree, and besides, if you actually look up Sumerian god genealogies, you'll find that they're radically inconsistent with one another, right? Because history hadn't been invented yet. But here we can see the marshes of Iraq, and all of the ancient cities that were there. Of course, now the marshes have been dried up because the Iraqi government built a giant dam in the 80s, I think. Maybe it was the 60s. It was recently. And an entire ecosystem and way of life was destroyed. The Marsh Arab people all had to flee to the cities because their marshes went away. And the ancient cities that are in the marshes, well, they're archaeology. I remind you of someone you've lost. Well, we'll say Kaddish in a little bit. and you can think of them. I'm glad to hear that. So, we're going to skip the introductions. The translators tell you about how and why they translated, and we will go directly to the first story, which is the Hulupu tree. And I like that there are images in this book, right? And they're old Sumerian seals, right? So here we have Inanna and the Hulupu tree. Not really, right? This is poetic license. It's a seal with a tree, and probably does have Inanna on it. But whether it refers to this specific story, almost certainly not. Thank you, Micah, for the vampires. So, let's read this story. In the first days, in the very first days, in the first nights, in the very first nights, in the first years, in the very first years, in the first days when everything needed was brought into being, in the first days when everything needed was properly nourished, when bread was baked in the shrines of the lands, and bread was tasted in the homes of the land, when heaven had moved away from earth, and earth had separated from heaven, and the name of man was fixed, when the sky god On had carried off the heavens, when the air god Enlil had carried off the earth, when the queen of the great below, Ereshkigal, was given the underworld for her domain, he set sail. The Father set sail. Enki, the god of wisdom, set sail for the underworld. Small windstones were tossed up against him. Large hailstones were hurled up against him, like onrushing turtles. The charged keel of Enki's boat. The waters of the sea devoured the bow of his boat like wolves. The waters of the sea struck the stern of his boat like lions. At that time, a tree, a single tree, a hulupu tree, was planted by the banks of the Euphrates. The tree was nourished by the waters of the Euphrates. The whirling south wind arose, pulling at its roots and ripping at its branches until the waters of the Euphrates carried it away. What an image, right? So, last month we were reading the story of Atrahasis, right, the Great Flood, which is also a Mesopotamian story. And so we see commonalities between all of these stories. We have in the early times, the gods differentiated heavens and earth, and there was great water. A woman who walked in fear of the word of the sky god On, who walked in fear of the word of the air god Enlil, plucked the tree from the river and spoke. I shall bring this tree to Uruk. I shall plant this tree in my holy garden. Inanna cared for the tree with her hand. She settled the earth around the tree with her foot. She wondered, how long will it be until I have a shining throne to sit upon? How long will it be until I have a shining bed to lie upon? And there we have Inanna at the base of the hulupu tree. The years passed. 5 years, then 10 years. The tree grew thick, but its bark did not split. Then a serpent, sound familiar? A serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the hulupu tree. The Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the hulupu tree, and the dark-maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. And here we have an image of, this is probably Ereshkigal, but we can say that it's Lilith. The young woman who loved to laugh wept. How Inanna wept, and yet they would not leave her tree. As the birds began to sing at the coming of the dawn, the sun god Utu left his royal bedchamber. Inanna called to her brother Utu, saying, "Oh, Utu, in the days when the fates were decreed, when abundance overflowed in the land, when the sky god took the heavens and the air god took to the earth, when Ereshkigal was given the great below for her domain, the god of wisdom, Father Enki, set sail for the underworld, and the underworld rose up and attacked him. At that time, a tree, a single tree, a hulupu tree, was planted by the banks of the Euphrates. The south wind pulled at its roots and ripped at its branches until the waters of the Euphrates carried it away. I plucked the tree from the river. I brought it to my holy garden. I tended the tree, waiting for my shining throne and bed. Then a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the tree. The Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree, and the dark-maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. I wept, how I wept, yet they would not leave my tree." And here we have the serpent pattern. Right, it's just a woven pattern, but if you look very carefully, I don't even think I can show you that on the camera, but the pattern does begin and end with a serpent's head and a serpent's tail, and then the serpent is wrapped around itself in a weave, right? So it's an Ouroboros. Just another version of the Ouroboros everywhere in ancient mythology. Yeah, let's just finish the whole story. Utu, the valiant warrior Utu, would not help his sister Inanna. As the birds began to sing at the coming of the second dawn, Inanna called to her brother Gilgamesh, saying, "Oh, Gilgamesh, in the days when the fates were decreed, when abundance overflowed in Sumer, when the sky god had taken the heavens and the air god the earth, when Ereshkigal was given the great below for her domain, the god of wisdom, Father Enki, set sail for the underworld, and the underworld rose up and attacked him. At that time a single tree, a hlupu tree, was planted by the banks of the Euphrates. The south wind pulled at its roots and ripped at its branches until the waters of the Euphrates carried it away. I plucked the tree from the river, I brought it to my royal garden, I tended the tree, waiting for my shining throne and bed. Then a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the tree. The Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree, and the dark-maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. I wept, oh how I wept, yet they would not leave my tree." And there we have the bird that makes its nest in the hlupu tree. Gilgamesh, the valiant warrior, Gilgamesh, the hero of Uruk, stood by Inanna. Gilgamesh fastened his armor of 50 minas around his chest. The 50 minas weighed as little to him as 50 feathers. He lifted his bronze axe. My cat is destroying my... Hi, cat. Hello. You're in the way. Okay, come on. Gilgamesh lifted his bronze axe, the axe of the road, weighing 7 talents and 7 minas, to his shoulder. He entered Inanna's holy garden. Gilgamesh struck the serpent who could not be charmed. The Anzu bird flew with his young to the mountains, and Lilith smashed her home and fled to the wild, uninhabited places. Gilgamesh then loosened the roots of the hlupu tree, and the sons of the city who accompanied him cut off its branches. From the trunk of the tree he carved a throne for his holy sister. From the trunk of the tree Gilgamesh carved a bed for Inanna. From the roots of the tree she fashioned a puku for her brother. From the crown of the tree Inanna fashioned a miku for Gilgamesh, hero of Uruk. And here we have Inanna and Gilgamesh with the hlupu tree between them. Cat, don't you know that I set the cameras in a very particular angle, and if you mess with them, I'm gonna mess with you. So, that is the story of Inanna and the hlupu tree. And, I think it's very interesting because it has these, resonances of Genesis. It's not quite Genesis, right? It's not quite Adam and Eve. There's no reference to sin. But nonetheless, there is a serpent and a woman. And in this story, it is not that they get cast from the garden, but rather they cut the tree down in order to make the throne and the bed, right? The symbols of the state and of kingship, of civilization, right? So we have these old stories, and they mutate and they permutate. Lots of stories with the same theme. Yeah. These are the stories that we've inherited. Right, and it wouldn't be fair to say that that story is a direct ancestor of the stories that we get in the Bible, and nor would it be necessary, right? We don't actually have to frame everything in terms of the Bible mythology that most modern people are exposed to. But I really, really appreciate being able to be exposed to the diversity of ancient stories that people learned thousands of years ago. And of course, none of them read all the stories that I've read, right? Because I can pick and choose from different regions of the ancient world, and I can jump back and forth hundreds or thousands of years in order to pick at themes and ideas. But there's incredible diversity, and yet some of the messages remain the same, right? This idea of the fall, right? That there, in the ancient times, there was a grand tree where all the wild things lived, and it was cut down so that the king could rule, right? It remains resonant, right? As we continue to warp the world in our own image, right? And we have this climate crisis and blah, 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 right? We have been telling the story of how humans made the world different for as long as we've been doing so. And I think they're important. So thank you for sharing them with me. Hello, cat. Hello, cat. I'm bothering you because you're bothering me. Okay. Alright, I'll let you be. Plop. Okay. So, I think it's time for Arati. I've lost my candle. Oh, I lost it a while ago. Silly me. Mama cat needed some screen time. Yeah, she's been kind of obnoxious today. But she's a good cat. I am feeling better, Erica. Thank you. My energy levels are basically back to normal, which is to say that I still have like low-level chronic depression, and I'm not as energetic as I was a few years ago, but I'm basically better. I have a mild cough and a runny nose still, but I'm basically better. Life is a trial and love is a trouble. Beauty will fade and riches will flee. Thank you for asking. I know that doesn't sound terribly optimistic of me, but I am feeling better and I'm glad to be here. Share this morning with you. How are you feeling? Okay. So, Arati is a fire prayer, right? It's a prayer where we repeat various names of Indian gods and remind ourselves that they're all the same. Inanna and Ereshkigal and the Hlupu tree and the Anzu bird and the serpent and Lilith, right? They're all part of the same fabric, the same story matrix that informs us about who we are. Jaya Jaya Arati Vina Vinayaka Vina Vinayaka Shri Ganesha Jaya Jaya Arati Subramanya Subramanya Kartikeya Jaya Jaya Arati Venugopala Venugopala Venuola Papa Vidura Davarita Chora Jaya Jaya Arati Venkanta Ramana Venkanta Ramana Sankata Harana Sita Rama Radhe Shama Jaya Jaya Arati Gauri Manohara Gauri Manohara Bhavani Sankara Samba Sada Shiva Uma Maheshwara Jaya Jaya Arati Raja Rajeshwari Raja Rajeshwari Tripura Sundari Mahalakshmi Mahasaraswati Mahakali Mahashakti Jaya Jaya Arati Anjaneya Anjaneya Hanumanta Jaya Jaya Arati Dattatreya Dattatreya Trimurti Avatara Jaya Jaya Arati Adityaya Adityaya Bhaskaraya Jaya Jaya Arati Sanisharaya Sanisharaya Bhaskaraya Jaya Jaya Arati Sankarachaya Sankarachaya Advaita Grave Jaya Jaya Arati Sadgurunata Sadgurunata Shivananda Jaya Jaya Arati Vishnu Devananda Vishnu Devananda Vishnu Devananda Jaya Jaya Arati Agastya Munaye Agastya Munaye Shirama Priyaye Jaya Jaya Arati Ayapa Samine Ayapa Samine Dharma Shastave Jaya Jaya Arati Jesus Grave Moses Grave Buddha Grave Jaya Jaya Arati Muhammad Grave Guru Nanak Grave Samastya Guru Namaha Jaya Jaya Arati Venugopala. Bye, Kimmy. Natachasuyobati Natanjakaratam Lema Vidyobati Kutaya Magni Twameva Bantam Bandi Sarvam Tasya Basya Samidam Vivanti Om Gange Kayamune Kairagovari Saraswati Narmade Siddhikaveriya Namastitam Namo Namaha Twameva Mata Chabita Twameva Twameva Bandisha Saka Twameva Twameva Vidya Dravinam Twameva Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Kayena vacha manasendriyarva budyat manava prakriti sabhavad karomiadyad sakalam parasmahe narayanaiti sarmar payami Sarvadamam Ravichayam Amekam Sarvadambraja Aham Sva Sarvapapayo Mokshayami Masicha. Good morning. Hello. Whatever actions I perform with my body, speech, mind, senses, my nature, my intellect, or my emotions, all these, I dedicate to you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for living your life with me. So now we'll say Kaddish. Kaddish is a prayer of grief, a prayer of mourning. We remember those who came before us and have since gone. And we remember all of the pains and losses in our lives, and the disappointments, and the person we wish we were but we aren't, and the person we want to be but we aren't. And we release them. We let them go. Publicly and together we say these words of mourning and grief to remind ourselves that we are not alone in our suffering. For the last 2,500 years, my ancestors have been saying these words in response to death. Vid kadal, vid kadash, shemei rabba. Bialma dirachir te viamlich malchute, bachayachot uvyobichot uvchaye de kolbe Israel, bagalav is bankari vimru, amen. Yehe shemei rabame v'arach li'olam amei almaya. Yit barach vishtabach vit ba'ar vit ramam vit nase, vit hadar vit ale vit alal shemei de kudasha berechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata, jamiran bialma vimru, amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yachol Yisrael, vimru, amen. Ose shalom b'mirma fuya ase shalom aleinu v'yachol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Ose shalom b'mirma fuya ase shalom aleinu v'yachol Yisrael v'imru v'imru. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I will see you here tomorrow. Say these words once more. I may not be able to stream tomorrow. I have a lot of meetings. Depends on how early I'm able to get up. How many meetings do I have tomorrow? I have 4 meetings tomorrow. Yeah, I have a meeting at 10. I don't think I will be able to stream tomorrow. So, well, I'll see you on Wednesday. In any case, thank you so much. If you would like to support this community here and the work of care that we do together, I would encourage you to check out the link in my bio. You can support this stream on Patreon or by subscribing on TikTok. You get little emojis, or you can make a one-time tip. There's other options besides. I can't list them all because the world is complicated and full of digital nonsense. But thank you for being here. I really, really do appreciate it very deeply. And I'll see you again soon. Okay, farewell.